5, 4, 3.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the Excluded UK event this evening, 1 week ahead of the government's budget. My name's Kevin Lee. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office for Andy Burnham. I'll hand over in a moment to Andy, who will be hosting and chairing this evening's event. Just before I do, I'm just going to ask colleagues who are on the Zoom call if you could please mute whilst others are speaking, just to avoid any background noise. I also want to welcome our guests this evening. So that's Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Steve Rotheram, the Mayor of the Liverpool City Region, and Dan Jarvis, the Mayor of Sheffield City Region. But particularly, I want to welcome Martin Lewis, John Caudwell, and Gina Miller, who have joined us this evening to show support for Excluded UK, and also to a number of colleagues who have been affected and are members of Excluded UK, who will be giving you their personalised stories as we go through the evening. We do have media on the call, and we will be taking questions from the media throughout the event. So after Martin has spoken, and then potentially after John has spoken as well, and then at the end of the event as well, if the media do have any questions. So with that housekeeping done, if I can hand over to Andy.
Thanks very much indeed, Kevin. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to this, the 6th Mayor's event with Excluded UK, and you're live on Facebook, and we're hopefully being heard right across the UK tonight. We created this as a platform for people who've been denied public support to tell their story, to describe what it's been like. And that has really come through in these last 5 events before this that we've done. Powerful, powerful stories. And at times, I think all of us, really kind of shocked to our kind of core, really, in terms of what you've all been through, and more determined to act to support you. I think people's voices have been sort of listened to so far, but they've not been truly heard nor acted upon. And with the budget approaching, as Kevin says, the time is to go up a level with regard to the campaign. And it's fantastic, actually, that we've got some of the country's best campaigners joining us tonight. Gina Miller, Martin Lewis, and John Caudwell. We're grateful, so grateful to you all. Since we last met, there have been a couple of changes. Of course, we've got the roadmap now, which has offered us some hope this week. But obviously, for the people on this call, it comes at a time where they are not in a position really to start thinking about the future, because they haven't been supported over the last year. And actually, many of the people will still not be able to trade properly for the rest of this year. So this isn't an issue that's going, this is an issue that's with us for the rest of 2021. We've got the legacy of 2020, and of course, the challenge of 2021, when people still can't get back to what they want to do and trade as normal. The second thing that's happened is we've got clearer evidence about what exclusion means and what it has done to inequality in our country. We had research last weekend from the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, which said that across the country, the number of households in destitution has doubled during the pandemic. In the northwest of England, it has increased 6-fold. And Steve Rotheram and I are in a position where the economy of Greater Manchester and the Liverpool City region is absolutely more exposed to the pandemic because of our reliance on events, on tourism, on the music industry, and people who work in that wide range of sectors. We are very much exposed. We have tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, in fact, affected. And I'm sure that's shared across the Pennines with Dan, and it's great that Dan is joining us tonight. So the situation is dire. People are desperate for help, Chancellor, and you need to listen to their call tonight. This is about providing individual support and individual survival for people, given the situation that are in. But it's also about collective recovery for the country. How are we going to bring this country back together and get recovery going properly if so many of our fellow citizens are left bankrupt, shattered, and feeling abandoned by their own country? Because that is what it comes down to. So in conclusion, before I hand over to Sonali from Excluded UK, I would just want to say that Steve and I have got long experience of working on justice campaigns. Sometimes campaigns that have only affected part of the country, particularly like Hillsborough, or campaigns that have only affected people with a particular issue, like the contaminated blood campaign. But let's just think about what's involved here. We're talking about 1 in 10 people in the workforce, people of all backgrounds from all parts of the UK, people who come from all walks of life, people who are the lifeblood of our communities. They've been left without the basics in a national crisis. So how is their voice not being heard? How has action not yet been taken to rectify the situation that they are in? It is that serious, Chancellor. Do you really want to leave a message hanging over the country at the end of this pandemic that it's too risky to follow your dream, too risky to go on your own and set up your own business? Is that really one of the legacies that you want to leave at the end of this pandemic? I'm still hoping that it's not. And I just want to finish by saying it's not about politics. Party politics is nothing to do with this. Wherever people are coming from, tuning into this call tonight, whatever your own views, whatever your own politics, none of that matters. What should unite us all is that we all want to see a Britain that still stands for fairness, that still looks after everybody. That's the kind of Britain that I think we all want to belong to. So, Chancellor, you've had time to listen. The time to act is now upon us. We tonight are calling for fairness for 3 million of our fellow taxpayers, our fellow citizens, and that quite simply is the demand from this call tonight. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Sonali Joshi from Excluded UK. Sonali.
Hi, my name is Sonali Joshi and I'm one of the founders of Excluded UK. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and thanks to the Metro Mayors Andy Burnham, Steve Rotheram and Dan Jarvis for their ongoing support. I'd also like to welcome all our speakers who've joined us this evening, Martin Lewis, John Caudwell and Gina Miller, who've all been such strong advocates for this cause over the past year, and also our 4 speakers who'll be sharing with us their stories of being excluded. And I'd just like to quickly add that Martin Lewis is with us for a short while before he has to leave, and we'll be hearing from him shortly. And also John Caudwell will be joining us a little bit later on, and he'll be joining us for a short while. Excluded UK is a volunteer-run grassroots not-for-profit organisation established in response to the financial challenges faced by individuals and businesses entirely or largely excluded from government COVID-19 support. As we approach the budget in a week's time on 3rd of March, individuals and businesses across the UK shut out of support through no fault of their own face ever-increasing hardship and uncertain futures. We're urging the Chancellor to recognise the economic and wider impacts on those affected in the upcoming budget as we hit 1 year since the onset of this crisis. With little to no support for some 3 million UK taxpayers, many of whom have been plunged into debt and poverty. The furlough and self-employment income support schemes fell far short of providing adequate financial support for all who were in need. Some exclusions were perhaps oversight, but others were clear policy decisions with arbitrary hard edges to the eligibility criteria, schemes that were poorly targeted, creating huge disparities. Certain sections of society have been disproportionately affected by these exclusions. Those shielding, younger workers, older workers, pregnant women and new parents, and in fact women more broadly. And welfare has not provided a safety net. Unfair exclusions have also been applied to the business grants, and most recently the discretionary council grants, the criteria for which are being applied inconsistently across the country, resulting in a postcode lottery. We estimate that around 3 million taxpayers are affected, although we now think that figure is a little higher due to some recent data that's come to light. The National Audit Office had estimated 2.9 million were excluded from the schemes, while Standard Life Foundation's recent survey estimated 3.8 million are affected. From our latest survey, which has just closed and the results of which we've just published today, from over 5,500 responses, we can see clearly that the impacts have been profound and the outlook as things stand is bleak. So just to give you a quick snapshot of the headline stats that emerged from this survey, which illustrates the depth and extent of the issue. 69% said they'd seen a drop in personal income of 50% or more from their pre-COVID income. And out of the total, 41% saw a drop of 75 to 100%. 75% have had to live off personal savings since March 2020. 58% are in debt as a direct result of COVID-19. 53% have had to rely on a partner, family or friends for financial support. 51% of respondents who applied for benefits have not been successful. And 75% say being excluded is affecting their mental health, at least on a weekly basis. Ample time has passed for the issues to be rectified, and we hope to see these vital changes reflected in next week's budget. A variety of non-complex proposals are being put forward to the Treasury. We've given direct input into some of these, including a proposal concerning maternity and parental rights across all the exclusions in the schemes, and which was mentioned in Parliament earlier this week. And that served to highlight the fact that maternity and parental issues, for instance, do not appear to have been considered in the design of the schemes. Similarly, many other sets of personal circumstances don't appear to have been considered, resulting in some rather absurd subcategories within the exclusions. For example, people in receipt of widows' pensions, bereavement payments, carers allowance, those made redundant, those with savings. And of course, we know that there are other categories of exclusions across both the furlough scheme and the self-employment income support scheme. But the overriding call from those affected is parity of support for the full period of support provided by the two schemes. More broadly, this last year has highlighted a lack of understanding on government's part of what it really means to be a freelancer, self-employed, a small limited company director. And it's brought into sharp focus the precarious nature of various employment statuses, as well as other inequalities, such as working conditions for freelancers, the self-employed, those on zero-hour contracts, as well as gender inequality. Denying meaningful support to those who needed it is unjust and unfair, and not helping those affected is completely at odds with economic recovery. Having faced 1 year of decimated incomes, decimated livelihoods and businesses, for those affected, impacts are only set to become more acute over time, while uncertainty still hangs over many of the hardest hit sectors, with a long road to recovery ahead. I'm now absolutely delighted to welcome Martin Lewis, founder of Money Saving Expert and the Money and Mental Health Institute, who's going to share his thoughts with us. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Sonali. And I think the passion and frankly anger I can hear in your voice is of course justified. What I aim to do now is to split this into three. First, I want a little bit of a recap of where we are, what's happening and what the problem is. Then I thought it would be useful to do some expectation management on what I think is going to happen in the budget next week, and then I'll take some questions. So around 11 months ago, I was one of many who I believe rightly lauded and applauded the Chancellor's revolutionary actions when he came up with policy in days that would normally have taken decades. Right away, we noticed there were some cracks in those policies, but fair enough. That was absolutely understandable and necessary. And in those early days, I was sort of in an intermediary role, if you like, spending my time, half of it, explaining to the public what their rights were, what they could get, how furlough worked, how cease would work. And on the other hand, getting an enormous, thousands and thousands of people feeding back to me what the problems were, going to the government, raising those problems. And in some cases, we got them fixed. And that was great. But I think I wrote in early April a blog of 9 things that needed to change to fix the cracks. And they didn't change. And those cracks became crevices. And the crevices became chasms. And those chasms exist now, 11 months later. And that is unforgivable. It's unforgivable that we've been left in this situation. Some of them, as Sonali rightly said, are principled political objections. The limited company issue, quite perversely, when the Chancellor announced it, he also said at the same time, we really need to fix the amount of tax that limited companies pay. Now, to me, that sounded like it would be an introduction to saying we're going to help you, but we're fixing tax afterwards. Bizarrely, what we got is, we're not going to help you and we're going to crack down on the tax afterwards, which didn't make any sense. I do think I hear talk that some of those principled objections are softening at the moment, and I'll come on to that more later. But I think the truth of what happened is there was this rose-colored spectacle idea that the first wave was going to be it, that they were coming towards the end of that. They didn't want to make any changes. I think the financial situation that we got when we got hit of the second wave and all the extension of furlough and the extra cease grants that hadn't been there before were put in, they were done on the fly because it hadn't been expected, it hadn't been predicted. And that's why we are still in this position where those chasms haven't been filled. And for me, it's short-sighted. Now, I need to explain that I believe one of the reasons this has been left is the Chancellor's job and aim within what he's trying to do is to protect the economy. He wants to protect the economy, and the economy is his focus, not the individual. And in many ways, what they've done with furlough has protected the economy. I did a poll on my Twitter the other day. 59% of people staggeringly say they are better off than they were at this time last year. They've built up savings. That must stick in the claws of everybody who's excluded watching. But it is an important part of the dynamic because it means the Chancellor has saved the economy in his eyes and the sacrifice is the individual. But I believe we need to be plain that even that long-term is short-sighted because society and its FCA analysis roughly falls into 4 categories right now. You've got the people who were doing well before and are doing well now. Many of them are furloughed or they've got their jobs, they're at home, they're spending far less than they did before. You've got the people who are surviving right now. Things aren't so good for them, but they've got enough help and support, probably eligible for a cease grant that's just getting them through this tough period. You've got the people who were in the mire before and they're still in the mire now. Arguably, to an extent, with the universal credit uplift, they might actually be slightly better off than they were before. But that's a big long-term societal, how do we rescue those people argument. You know, that's not just the COVID argument. And then you've got the category which many excluded fall into. The category of people who were able to take care of themselves before, who had income before. They may work in hospitality, they may work in the leisure sector, they may work in a whole different host of fields. They were self-sufficient, they were contributing, they were taxpayers, they were a thriving part of our economy. And because of this horrible pandemic and the need to lock down to protect people's health, they, through no fault of their own, has had their income taken away from them. And for a month or two, that was just pretty shitty, forgive my language. But afterwards, it has catastrophized people's finances into a non-survivable position. And the problem with that is, even once the economy recovers, Andy talked about a year, when you catastrophize someone's finances, you don't escape in a year. I know you were talking about the economy, but actually personal finances, it can be 5 or 10 years, 15 years until you get out of debt. And that is eminently short-sighted, if you ask me, because people who could have survived, and if they'd been given help, would have got through all this, on the back end will become a burden on their state, on the state. And I don't want anyone listening to think I'm blaming you. I'm not. I'm saying it's short-sighted policy. If you want to protect the economy, one of the things you do is you protect those people who were capable of being self-sufficient before and will be capable of being self-sufficient again. But if you collapse their finances in the middle, they may not be capable of being self-sufficient again. So I've been shouting about this for a year. Not very much has changed. So where are we now? What do we think is going to come out in the Chancellor's budget? I have no special knowledge. None of this is a leak. I need to say that beforehand. But conversations I've had, I mean, there are some things that are more likely than others. I would certainly think that for new starter self-employed, it would be unforgivable if the Chancellor did not start to include the 2019-2020 tax returns in the assessment for the forced self-employment grant. And in fact, my suspicion that that's happening is I think that's why they've had the delay and then are announcing it in the budget rather than they would have done earlier, because there is going to be change coming. So let's cross our fingers and say that one I think is more probable than not and will help some people. Will they be helping those who are limited companies? That's where I feel the initial principled objection has been softened in the conversations I've been having. I don't know what will happen. I now think the question is more, can they get over their concerns over fraud? I'm not saying how well justified they are, but they got a kicking at the National Audit Office. And therefore, I think there's an allergy to being told that there's fraudulent schemes that are being set up, or schemes which people could defraud. If they can get over that, I suspect we may see support for limited companies. I would be less surprised to see them changing the £50,000 threshold, or it would be nice to see them putting a tapering in on that, which would have been eminently sensible. So someone earns 80 grand, give them the same £2,500. Give them the same amount of money as someone on £50,000, but you don't need to cut it off, and maybe start the tapering after 100,000. I think would have been more sensible. Freelance PAYE, I don't know that they're going to do that much for those people, because I think it was sort of their view is, what we've effectively done is subcontracted the welfare system towards companies. That's what furlough is. It's the welfare state, but subcontracted through companies to do it. And therefore, if companies decide not to do it, well, it's become arbitrary, and it's a potluck system. Not very fair. Probably the right thing to do in the first 3 months, not necessarily the right thing to do after a year. And then there's what Sonali asked for. And you're not going to like this. You asked for parity. I don't see parity coming. I think any changes that are coming going forward will be for money going forward and will not be retrospective. I think it is very unlikely they're going to say, we're going to incorporate new people into our system and we're going to backdate it to March last year. And the problem with that, and I need to be honest to the Excluded supporters here, is the difficulty in arguing for more support going forward is because so many people, even if the Chancellor comes out and provides that extra support, will spit and swear and say, you need to give us parity. And therefore, almost, we are in a nuanced situation. This isn't a value judgment, this is an explanatory judgment, where you have to ask the question, if you spit and swear too much about parity, the Chancellor has a vested interest not to bother doing anything at all. Because if he can't win by giving out more money, he may as well not give out more money. I'm not saying that's a moral or ethical judgment to do it. So I think there is a very difficult campaigning issue for Excluded right now. You have my support. Please, nobody read that analysis of it's not vested. It's just it's studying the situation that we're in right now. But I thought it would be useful to try and explain my thoughts on what's coming. But boy, do I hope I've never got it more wrong. Right, and now, Kevin, I said I'd take some questions. I should probably do that. I hope that made sense, everyone.
That was fantastic, Martin. Thank you so much for that and for joining us this evening. We do have Joshi Herman from The Mill in Manchester has got a question for you, Martin.
Sure.
Joshi.
Hi, Martin. Just a quick question. How big are your concerns about personal debt coming out of this crisis, particularly for the people we're talking about? And when you say it can take 10 to 15 years to recover, can you sort of give us a bit more of a sense of what is the nightmare that you are envisaging here when it comes to personal debt?
So I think personal debt is a real problem. One of my other campaigns is about mortgage prisoners, and there are people who've been trapped since 2007. Let's remember that. And right now, if you add up those who've been excluded, whose finances are catastrophized, those who are locked in and unable to remortgage due to cladding, those who now we have a higher LTV is required in order to be able to get a mortgage deal. There are many people who are potentially, and if stamp duty, the rise in house prices due to stamp duty, which could see it reverse on the back end, that's not a prediction, it's a possibility. I'm not saying it'll happen before. I know the media there, I don't want to be misreported on that. Well, if you add all those together, we could have a lot more mortgage prisoners, and that could last a long time. And also, look, we know there are excluded people who will be going bankrupt or having IVAs on the back of this. You don't recover in that in a year. You get out of it in 5 or 6 years, and then you've got to rebuild afterwards and rebuild all your finances. It takes a very long time. So how concerned am I? Well, I actually think the regulator, the FCA, did a good job on the mortgage payment holidays. I actually think they've done they should be applauded for their quick action. That was good intervention. I am slightly more concerned now that we're moving into those who've already had their payment holidays and moving into what's called tailored support. The problem with tailored support is when you had a prescriptive, you must give people 6-month mortgage payment holidays. It was locked in. There was no, moving around the edges. Tailored support is much more difficult to police. And I've been lobbying certainly that the regulator actually goes and does really strong evaluations to check that you don't have a bank lottery, as we've seen in other areas of this, of whether you're being supported or not. But that won't last much longer. My hope is we might see the payment holidays extended beyond the 31st of March date, now that we've had the roadmap. But that will only be short-term help. And if people have had no income for a year and a half, are slow to recover their income, struggling to get their businesses back on the road, then there is a question of whether the support that is available will be there long enough to keep some people afloat. And look, there's no question about it. It won't be. It won't be. There will be people who will go under financially because of this. And I would say to those listening who are panicked about that now, if you're panicked about your debt, Citizens Advice, National Debt Line, Step Change, go and talk to them. Debt is a nightmare, but there is always in the long run a way out of it, and life does carry on and get better. So while we can have people's finances catastrophize, and it will happen, protect your mental health and know that life can change and be better and wonderful even in the hardest moment. It's important to say that, I think. I hope that answers you, Joshi.
Thanks very much, Martin. Thanks for the question, Joshi. I've had no other media indicating in the chat that they have a question. Does anyone want to indicate now? If not, Martin, over to you for a final word, but thank you so much for joining us.
Well, my final word is we have to have hope in the budget. We have to look and say the Chancellor doesn't have an easy job. I mean, an economy is not a household. It's not a question you've got to always balance the books, because my house certainly can't effectively do quantitative easing to print my own money, and I don't make money. When I go out to the shops and spend it, it doesn't come back to me, which an economy does. So the equation isn't the same, but government debt is still certainly a problem, and we don't want to build it up, and it is a balance. And while I don't think you're going to get parity going backwards, I think we certainly need parity going forwards, and that those people whose lives have been destroyed because they've just sat in the wrong category, or they haven't been furloughed, or they were just outside the threshold, or there was a principled objection to supporting them for 3 months and they didn't realise it would be for a year. We need parity of help there, and I hope we get it. But my fingers are crossed, rather than an honest belief that everyone will come out of this on the 3rd of March smiling and rosy. Good luck, everyone.
Thanks very much again, Martin, for joining us this evening, for your fantastic contribution. I'm going to hand over to the Mayor of the Liverpool City region to comment now on what he's heard from Martin, but just ahead of us hearing from some of the individuals who have been affected. So over to Steve Rotheram, Mayor of Liverpool City region.
Thanks, Kev, and thanks, Martin. And I know Andy was on. I missed Andy, so I'm really fortunate tonight to have done that. Look, I think the starting point for this is that, let's get it right. The whole situation that we're talking about tonight is being caused by Rishi Sunak's refusal to put right his original mistake. And we almost forgave him at one point and say, look, we all make mistakes, and you had to rush into trying to get a support package for the country. But then when it's pointed out that there are 3 million people that have been excluded, then his refusal to address that is still simply morally bankrupt, and he needs to do something other than repeat those same mantras he does every time he's asked for putting record amounts into support packages, etc. So over the last few months on these calls, we've heard tales of real hardship, and we've heard people worrying about whether they can actually pay the rent or the mortgages. But I just want to pick one thing up, Kevin. You might remember this one as well. Myself and Andy certainly do. And it was one case when we heard from someone who was going through chemotherapy for breast cancer. And she said that she'd rather go through the same treatment again rather than the torture that she had to go through by being excluded. And that plays on my mind. I mean, how can that possibly be right? And that there's this refusal to do something about it. So, look, it's wrong that the government has chosen that they'll support some viable businesses while let others go into the wall. But we've tried to do something in our area. People will be aware that in the Liverpool City region, we have tried to address some of the government inaction with local support packages, and we put together the first support packages of its kind in the country. But it's not possible to help everyone. And so whilst I'll hold my hands up and say, look, we're only papering over the cracks, at least we're doing something to address and admit that there's a very real problem. And that's all that we're asking the government to do. We're saying to the government, just put it right. Hold your hands up and say, look, we've made some mistakes. We might not be able to do what Martin alluded to earlier, and that is to provide parity, so you get every penny back going right, back to day one. But this is something only the government can adequately put right, because it's a mess of their own making. So the budget is the last chance to do something meaningful at a national level, because we know that restrictions are coming to an end and the economy is going to open in a few months' time, and life will return back to normal for many people. But it won't for the 2.9 million people who've been excluded. And there's the old adage, isn't there, that justice delayed is justice denied, and that's all they're asking for. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Steve. Hand over to Sonali now, who's going to introduce colleagues from Excluded UK to tell us their very personal stories. Sonali.
We're now going to hear from our first two case studies, followed by some comment from John Caudwell. I know John has now joined us. Hi, John. Good day.
Hi, everybody.
So our first case study is Eleanor in Sheffield. Eleanor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on tonight. I'm a little bit nervous, so I've written some things down. So I'm Eleanor, and I run Shimmy School and Shimmy Shows. So what I do is I go around various different places in the community and I teach classes, mostly belly dance classes, a lot of fitness classes. And as well as that, I do professional belly dancing. So I'll go to weddings, restaurants, on cruise ships, sometimes I get to go on TV if I'm really lucky. Loads of different things. We make sure our classes are inclusive for everybody. So we have kind of seated classes and things for people who maybe have had strokes. It's basically my whole world. That is what I've worked for my entire life. In 2018, I made the scary decision to go full time with it. But obviously, if you don't get a big kind of grant straight away, you have to work 2 different jobs maybe at the same time and then kind of switch over to becoming more self-employed. So that is why I'm excluded, because in 2018, just over half of what I earned was from Sheffield City Council in a paid job. Since October 2018, I have been completely self-employed. But I still don't qualify for various other reasons as well. Okay, so March happened, and obviously everything kind of disappeared overnight for everybody. I knew kind of in the back of my head that self-employed people would probably not be first to get help. So I sort of braced myself and I was like, right, what can we do to survive until that point? So we got all of our classes online, just like everybody else did, and sort of switched ourselves around literally overnight to just try and survive until that time. And then I thought June, I think that was the first government support. I thought we just have to make it till June and we'll be fine. June comes along and I find out that I'm not eligible for any help at all, including any kind of job seekers or what is it called? Just government support, any support at all. So in that time, I think there was like 3 or 4 months before that first gap. So I was trying to sort of survive by my friends and family. So I lodged some friends in my house. I moved in with my parents for a bit, and luckily my house was going to be sold. And I sold my house and I have been living off of the small amount that I got for it. So not enough for another house deposit, but that's what I've been eating into kind of month by month. Just let me look up my things. Yeah, so I'm really actually quite lucky. I'm one of the really lucky ones. My friends and family are really supportive, and the people that go to shimmy school, the community is just incredible. So they have kept the business afloat. It's not been enough to sort of pay all my bills and things, so I still eat into stuff each month, but it's kept it going. I know that maybe I'll have something to come back to eventually when things start running again. The impact that it's had though on me for a whole year has been pretty intense. So mental health wise, I was just really rock bottom. So my anxiety was absolutely through the roof. I was having panic attacks. I was up at 3 a.m. worrying about different things. It's kind of manifested itself in different ways. And I'd just like to point out that I'm also found out around that time, about June, that I'm pregnant. So I can't, there's various different things that go on with pregnancies, and I can't kind of say that this is it, but I genuinely do think that me being so stressed for a lot of my pregnancy is now the reason why my baby's not growing at the rate that it probably should be. So I have growth scans every 2 weeks because of this. There's studies that kind of say stressed mums make small babies. I don't know whether that's true, but it's possibly affected me in that way. I've also felt kind of my self-worth and my place in society. I've sort of everything that I've built and has come crumbling down, and I kind of felt like maybe I had pride in our country that we would be supported in that way, because that's why you pay taxes. But it didn't really work like that. So I felt really kind of let down by everybody, and I was so angry for quite a while. I'm now unlikely to be able to probably buy a house again, at least for a very long time, which is a shame, because that's something that I really worked towards for a really long time. Especially being self-employed, it's harder to do that, kind of get on the property ladder anyway. So, but I've just had to sort of let that slide. Silver linings are that I've just got approved for my maternity allowance. So I now have a small amount of money, but I have something coming in every month, and the impact that has had on me has been incredible. So when I found out that I would get that, it was just like this huge weight lifted off me, and suddenly I had more room in my head to think about what had happened the past year. So now, because I'm not fighting to survive every single month, I can think about kind of the injustice that has happened to so many people, and I've got more room and more energy to put into that now that I don't have to focus on getting through each month. And I just want to say thank you again for having me on, and if you've got any questions, please do ask me as well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Eleanor. And we'll now turn to Matthew in London, before then coming on to John Caudwell. So I'll turn to Matthew.
Thanks very much. Good evening. My name is Matthew. I'm the director of Avian Cart Limited.
Matthew, you're just a little bit quiet. Do you want to just come a little bit closer and speak a little louder?
How's that? Is that any better? No?
So it's a little better, just maybe a touch louder?
Better?
Yeah.
This is the issue. It's a MacBook, so I'm using the mic. So I am the director of a food production business. We make snack boxes, and they were mainly aimed for people who were traveling, or people who were traveling on business, or something easy to take away, which was freshly prepared. And in the summer of 2019, I set this business up as a sole trader. I started employing people straight off the back. And at the start of February 2020, I took some advice from my lawyer and became a limited company. And obviously HMRC have to send over references to file pay as you earn, which we just didn't have. So when I transferred my employees, I associated my PAYE scheme as myself. And because the references were sent over after the 19th of March, nobody qualified for any furlough support. So that wasn't just me, that was several employees, loyal employees, who just fell completely through the cracks through no fault of their own. And because I wasn't technically registered as self-employed at the time, I hadn't filed a tax return, so I didn't get self-employed grants. So largely, the support which we lost out on was everything. The only piece of support we actually ever got was a bounce back loan. Bounce back loan was used to pay staff because staff had children, staff had homes, wasn't willing to let staff lose out on any of their home support. It wasn't an option for me. And I've had no government support, no welfare, nothing. My father died in June 2020, and I had to literally pull money from everywhere, from stocks and shares, from this small ISA that I had. And yeah, basically scrounge enough money to put together for the funeral. And largely speaking, I'm still working 95-hour weeks. I was very lucky to get some of my later employees on the furlough scheme from October. So my employees are still supported from then. But as such, nothing for me. I've taken nothing from the business. I've lived pretty much on beans. I'm an 18-year-old. I signed a bounce back loan when I was 17. That's how desperate it actually got. I signed a bounce back loan 5 days before my 18th birthday because I was that desperate to support my staff that I was willing to put myself in £45,000 worth of debt to make sure that they could stay at home and look after themselves. And it's been very, very hard. You know, obviously with the support of Excluded UK, we've had the Facebook group. So knowing that there were other people out there made it a bit easier. And just even forgetting about me for a minute, there are 3 million other people in the same boat who have all paid some form of income tax or corporation tax or VAT. Have all made a contribution to society. And largely speaking, we've not seen anything. I'm still working 90-hour weeks just trying to make business ends meet. And it is exhausting. I'm signed off for depression. I've been signed off for 5 months and I'm still working 95-hour weeks because the government refuses to pay anything towards us. Don't qualify for UC, don't qualify for any form of support. And basically that's where we're stuck now. I have nowhere else to turn. I'm literally running an overdraft with my personal account. And it's just absolute, I have no words for how we've been left. And because it's not just one person, it's not just a small group of limited company directors, it's not just freelancers. The amount of categories that there are is absolutely disgraceful. There were people, new starters, pay-as-you-earn freelancers, limited company directors, we all lost out. And largely speaking, that's now left us all in a hole, and it's going to be a hole which people probably like me will never recover from. People like me will end up going bankrupt or being disqualified from being a company director for a long time. Because we've done everything we can, not just to support the business, but to try and support the staff as well. We run ourselves, we pride ourselves on being an ethically friendly company. And that just went overnight because we actually decided, you know something, we support our staff more than we want the business to float. And that was a very hard decision to make for us. But no, I mean, I don't really have very much more to say on my story. But no, obviously, my massive thanks to everybody at Excluded UK and for everybody that's joined this evening. It's been hard, but hopefully the budget will yield some response next week, isn't it? So hopefully that's going to yield a good response for us. So thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Matthew. And I'm now delighted to welcome John Caudwell, business leader, philanthropist, and founder of Things for You. So over to you, John.
Thank you, Sonali, and thank you for those stories, guys. I mean, they're absolutely heart-wrenching. But congratulations to you both, because you're fighting through despite the government's lack of help for you. You know, my feelings about this are, I think, summarized in a very humbling way when my social media manager was told the other day by somebody in Forgotten, or Excluded, sorry, but the same principles apply, but I think somebody in Excluded that had said that she had planned her suicide and was on the point of committing suicide. And when she heard I was fighting for you guys, actually changed her mind. And I hope that's a permanent change of mind. But that for me was unbelievably humbling. But also sort of points out that if we keep fighting, we give people hope. And we do hope that the government do something about this. Now, I think Martin said it all pretty much. My take on it is somewhat different, because when this pandemic first came to Britain, I started campaigning with the government on a number of scores. And they said, don't worry, we've got 13 billion put aside. I said, are you joking? I said, you don't need 13 billion, you need about 200 or 300 billion. Of course, I underestimated it because I didn't realize how bad the pandemic was going to be. And I immediately started campaigning to say that the government had got to find 200 or 300 billion, and nobody should be substantially worse off at the end of the pandemic than they were at the start. And then I saw what the government were doing. And to be honest, I agreed with very little of it. So much so that I had some quite big campaigns direct into government, direct into the Prime Minister's office and with Rishi, because they did some things that were not very sensible. And these not very sensible things lead to this imbalance and this unfairness, which is catastrophic. And what they did, as we all know, they put furlough in. They put furlough in for a period of time and 80% of salary, but you got to be on permanent furlough. Well, we didn't need permanent furlough because some people could have worked 1 day a week or 2 days a week, but they weren't allowed. It was all or nothing. And that was ridiculous, because that was the government throwing our money away for no real reason. And the money that they've thrown away is money that could have gone to the excluded, could have gone to people that to help their lives get through this. And there's lots of examples like that. For instance, the bounce back loans originally, you may remember, were guaranteed by government for 80%. Now, you know, I'm a person that scratched through as a one-man band all the way up to 12,000 employees. I know what it was like to have to find equity in the business. Most businesses would never be able to put the 20% guarantee up in order to get that loan. And I actually had a half-hour conversation with Rishi on that to convince him that he was wrong on that, and they must put 100% guarantee in. And he argued against me for the whole half an hour that I spoke to him. But fortunately, 4 days later, he did change his mind and put 100% guarantee in. Now, I came to Excluded a little bit later in life, really, because I was campaigning for the greater good overall on a macro level by dealing with macro issues, and something I introduced 9 months ago, which was Caudwell Pandemic Recovery, which we called CPR, which was to get the government to invest massively in the future of this country, not to give money to people to spend, because that would only fuel inflation, but to invest in the future, create jobs by inward investment, via apprenticeship schemes, via environmental energy, renewable energy city, and by general infrastructure. And these big macro challenges of mine have really taken up most of my time, because I've had endless, I've sent letters into the Prime Minister. He is responding in a very positive way, but I still don't see evidence of them doing the right thing. And I have had a conversation with Rishi in an open forum when I said, why are you not looking after Excluded? And this has become a big part of my more focused campaign in recent months, because I have utterly sensed the dramatic unfairness of what's going on here. You know, if we're all broke and if we're all treated and we all struggle because there is no money to go around, that's fine. That's life. You know, we're not entitled to anything. We earn a living. We're not entitled to earn a living unless we work hard. But when our living is taken away from us totally, then it is utterly the government's responsibility to try and be fair across all classes of citizens of the UK and not to exclude anybody. Now, there will always be some people that are excluded, because I don't think anybody could ever get this 100% right. But Rishi is aware. I mean, he said to me in that phone call, he said, but there's only 5%. It's not 10%, it's only 5%. But that's, regardless of whether that's true or not, I'm not sure how he could sit there and say it's only 5%, because 5% is too much. And my point has been, since supporting Excluded, that the complication of all the different categories is no excuse for negligence and not addressing those categories. It is utterly unforgivable. People like Matthew and Eleanor are suffering dramatically. I can feel it. You know, yes, I'm wealthy. You might think I'm out of touch, but I'm not. I can feel your suffering. I know what it was like. I know how I would have suffered if this had have happened to me at any point of building my business up, which employed 12,000 people at the end of the day and made me a fortune. But I could have gone under if faced with this pandemic, because the overheads would have sunk me and the government support wouldn't have been enough. I know what you guys are going through. It's a horror story, and the government really do have to do something. Now, I agree with Martin. I don't think you're going to get retrospective parity. There's no chance whatsoever. But I would really, really implore Rishi to do something, even if it's only a partial compensation for what you've lost in the past, but do something for the past and protect you for the future, to give you all the possibility of survival, of going on. You know, if this had happened to me, and I go back to really at the beginning when I was just one man, it was just me sitting there creating my business. If this pandemic had have killed me off then, it would have killed off 12,000 jobs that I went on to create. And who knows? I mean, Matthew, you sound very entrepreneurial. You sound as though you're doing a great job, working really hard and surviving. Who knows how many jobs that you will create in the future if the government give you that possibility. But it isn't even about that. It's about fairness. It's about looking after people and trying to make the system as fair as possible to support people as equally as they're able to. So you have my undying support on this. I know Rishi's listened to me. I don't know whether he's going to do anything, and I don't kid myself that my voice on its own will cause him to change its mind, although it did seem to on the bounce back loans. I am, as probably most of you know, a financial supporter of the Tory party. I hope that might carry some weight in campaigning for your futures and for the fairness of your lives, to take some of that stress and some of that pressure off, even if not retrospectively, at least going forward, before more people commit suicide and before more people suffer horrible depressions. So I could talk about this forever, or the whole economic situation. I could talk about Caudwell pandemic recovery all night and why it's critical, why it's essential. I could talk about the money that they've thrown at some areas of society, principally furlough, where savings have gone up through the roof while you guys are left out, hanged out to dry. It's not right, and it's not fair, and it's not appropriate. It must be put right, and I hope it will be. If there aren't any questions, I'm very happy to take them.
Well said, John. Thank you.
No questions.
Kevin, do you know if there are any questions?
Thanks, Sonali. Thank you very much, John. No media have indicated any questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Well,
Okay.
I take my leave now, everybody, but I'm there. I shall carry on fighting until we get a solution to this, or until the pandemic's over. But even then, there is some help needed for some of you to help you pick yourself back up and get going again. So thank you all, and thanks to the mayors for taking this interest, and Martin, Lewis, and Gina, and everybody who's helping this fight. So thanks to everybody.
John, thank you so much, and for all your ongoing support.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good night.
I know you have to leave us now, so thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're now going to turn to our next two case studies. We've now got Gina in Manchester. Gina.
Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me on to tell my story. I'm Gina Ramsden. I run Peace Place Holistic Therapies, which is a corporate wellbeing service. My story is actually very, very similar to Eleanor's. So I had a 20-odd year career on the railways, and in 2018 I decided to follow my dream and leave all that behind me and become a full-time holistic therapist. I spotted a gap in the market in terms of fusing my corporate knowledge with my holistic passion, and I offered the corporate wellbeing service. So in January 2018 I set up and set off, and the first year, as it always is in business, was a little bit rough and a little bit bumpy as you set your business up, but I had a good plan, I had a good model, I followed it to the letter, I worked all the hours God sends, and by the second year it really started to turn a corner. I had some amazing clients. I had ITV, I used to look after the cast and crew of Emmerdale, I'm so proud of that, New Balance, NHS North Wales. So these weren't small clients, they were really, really big clients who bought into my service, who sort of recognised my passion for what I do, and took me on board, and I absolutely loved what I did. So into the second year I was able to invest in myself. I was able to do a lot more training to add to my skill set, upgrade my equipment, and my plan for the third year was always to grow the business even more so I could employ other people to help me and help bring relaxation to the masses, as I like to phrase it. So I had lots of plans going forward, but of course in March all that came to a halt when COVID hit. And like Helena said, listening to Boris and Mr. Sunak on that day, I genuinely never even, probably quite arrogantly, give it a second thought that I wouldn't have some form of support. I've never taken out the system. I've always added, I've always put in, I've towed the line, I've paid my taxes in a good career. And all of a sudden I found every single door that I knocked on was closed to me, and I didn't know where else to turn. I'm sorry. It's been an incredibly tough year. There was no CIS grant. There was no grant because I didn't have premises. There was no universal credit because, thank goodness, my husband works, but he is just over the threshold to claim any kind of benefits. There was no bounce back loan, just nothing available. So in September last year, we had to take the decision to sell our home. I'm currently living off the proceeds of that to see us through, but that's not going to last forever. I'm applying for jobs, but so is everybody else in the world. I'm hoping that something comes through for me soon, but to sell the house that I've had for 25 years and worked 7 days a week to keep that roof over my head is heartbreaking. It's been incredibly tough, and I'm sorry for getting so upset, but I can't help the way I feel. Mr. Sunak, you need to be aware that your society needs brave people to step out and to follow their passions and create a rich society. You're going to need that going forward. You're going to need the people who are creative, who are a bit wacky and off the wall, because those are the people that enrich society and add all the time. And all we're asking is that you listen to us. That's all we want, is to be heard and to be treated fairly. So as you can see, I don't really need to tell you how it's affected me, because I now look like somebody from Kiss. So I've got makeup down my face, but it's been incredibly tough. It's been absolutely heartbreaking. I'm lucky, as a similar situation to Eleanor, that I have some proceeds from my home that I can live on, but I find myself in a nice house, but it's not my home. My home's gone, with very, very unsure financial future. You know, I'm almost 50. I'm bobbing on a bit, and we had retirement plans. We had plans, and those are just gone. And we're sort of wandering around a little bit lost at the moment. Thank God we have each other. That's all I can say. So thank you for everything that Excluded and all the influences are doing for us. I know everybody really appreciates it, so thank you. And I'm just going to go and dry my eyes down. Sorry for making a fool of myself, but I'm very passionate and very, very disappointed and angry in how Excluded have been treated by our government that we elected.
Thanks, Gina. And we'll now turn to our last case study, Alison in Liverpool. Alison, over to you.
Hi everyone. That's very difficult to follow, Gainish. What a brave girl. Thanks for inviting me on to speak. I'm Alison Powell from Formby, Merseyside. When Sonali asked me to tell my story at this meeting, I said I thought that my case is not as poignant as some others amongst the excluded, as my husband is still working, and though my business has been decimated by the pandemic, it will hopefully survive, and so will we. However, being part of the excluded family involves bringing to light the numerous categories of injustice amongst the 3 million. My situation is that tax year 2018-19 was my last of being both part-time employed and self-employed. I established my business in 2014 as a sole trader, providing language tuition in primary school clubs, having taught languages for many years. Since February 2019, I've been purely self-employed, and I also employ one individual who I furloughed since March, but I did employ 3 before the pandemic. This employee was benefiting from some work from September to December, as the opening of schools provided a partial restart of my business, and I was claiming from the job retention scheme for 80% of her last hours. As schools have now been closed again from January to March, I once more have had no income, but I will continue to furlough my employee so that she can pay her rent. The reason for my own exclusion from government support was that in the 2018-19 tax year, I earned just £10 more from employment than from self-employment. So as a result, I didn't meet the criteria of having more than 50% of my income from self-employment in that year. I made it clear on that 2018-19 return that this employment had ceased in February 2019. I appealed to HMRC, but to no avail. If my 2019-20 return was used, which I submitted in April, in hope of a change of eligibility criteria, I would have been eligible for all of the SEISS grants. I don't qualify for universal credit as, fortunately, as I mentioned before, my husband is working, but the loss of my income is considerable. Matthew, who spoke earlier so bravely, is a young entrepreneur who has been deserted by the government. I'm at the other end of the working scale. I'm 62 years old, and my feelings are of injustice and anger that in spite of being a taxpayer for over 40 years, the government has abandoned me when for the first time in my working life, I need their support. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Alison. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce Gina Miller, who's now going to join us, co-founder of SCM Direct, True and Fair campaign, and a social justice campaigner. Over to you, Gina.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Sonali. It's made me so upset and angry to listen to Gaynor and Alison and Matthew and Eleanor. We should not be here. This event should not be happening this evening. When I first spoke to you, Sonali, and I heard of what was going on in July last year, never in my wildest dreams did I ever imagine that this would be the case a year on, that 3 to 3.8 million people would be ignored by this government. They talk about not pulling the rug out under the feet of businesses. Sunak talks about fairness in supporting the business community with taxpayers' money. There is no fairness here. It is an utter disgrace. It is a stain on the way we're dealing with this pandemic. To have incredible people who enrich our entire country, who are actually going to be the cogs in the wheel of the machinery that we need to come out of this pandemic. All of these people that we need that are being ignored, which I have to say must be deliberate. I cannot find any logical reason to carry on ignoring people. The phone calls I started getting last July from people who were telling me that their children could only have porridge 3 times a day, that they were selling their wedding rings on online websites because they didn't have money, that they were thinking about, as John said earlier, committing suicide. I just thought this was inhuman and that politicians would listen the more voices came together. And look at the tsunami of voices. We've got people from so many different political backgrounds, so many different walks of life. There are over 300 MPs now on the side of the excluded. We've got the APPG who are coming up with solutions. They cannot say they don't know what is going on. They cannot ignore this any longer. I heard what Martin said. I heard that, we're not going to get parity. I'm sorry, it's not good enough. Mr. Sunak has got to learn to say sorry. He has got to do a payment that is a parity emergency payment in this budget. And as far as I can see, there are solutions that have been suggested by think tanks, by foundations, by Standard Life Foundation, for example, by Resolution Foundation. The APPG has come up with a tick payment. There are so many solutions that are being thrown at this government, at Mr. Sunak, at Mr. Johnson. I could go and say, well, look at the past. There were policy deficits that led to today. And we could talk about how we have to learn the lessons of what we must do in the future. And we must be very worried about the future because, the Times last month said that you've got 1 in 5 young people saying that they want to be an entrepreneur. They want to do something, a social good company. That's extraordinary. They're like Matthew. We need thousands and millions of Matthews to build back. But what happens the next time there's a pandemic? We're facing an age of pandemics, we're told. We're facing climate insecurity that's going to lead to financial insecurity. If this government is not willing to listen now and learn the lessons and put in place the infrastructure so this never happens again, then we should not trust them. And right now, I don't trust them. I'm telling the government all the time, I'm a taxpayer, and I want you to use my money to support the excluded. All that money that came back from big businesses who paid back their furloughs, it's millions and millions we were told would be going into a fund for those who fell through the cracks. Where is that money? We were told that it was not going to be the budget that was going to be borrowed. It didn't matter how much it took because we were all in this together. We are not all in this together because instead of talking about acknowledging the pain that people are living through, there are so many days when I've come off calls and I've cried because it's reminded me. I spoke to a woman the other day who is a survivor of domestic violence, as I was. I remember sleeping in the car. I remember having, as Matthew said, eating beans and worrying how I could clothe my daughter. The pain has all come flooding back to me as I listen to the story of the excluded. And it is morally and monetarily not right. And it is not good enough. And we have to tell this government that on the 3rd of March, they have to put something back into the lives of the excluded. They have to give them hope. They have to do, we're not talking about payments to make up for the last year, just a one-off payment now. And for the next 4 months that this lockdown is going to go on, do something now. Even a little bit will stop people feeling that they have no hope. They have nothing to look forward to. They talk about now extending the tuition program, 400 million there, 200 million here and there. What about those children who are waking up and watching their parents crying, their parents shouting at each other, their parents hopeless that they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow? The people like Allison who have worked every single day and thought the government would be there on the day that she might fall on her knees, that they would lift her up. They are nowhere to be seen for her. This is so upsetting. We must all collectively tell this government it is not good enough. On the 3rd of March, we will judge you by the standards and the tears and the lives excluded. And if you do not step up, we will remember it on election day, whatever that is. Thank you.
I think over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, you very much. Thanks, Sonali. Thank you very much for that very powerful contribution, Gina. I'm going to hand back to Andy now.
Wow, I mean, the contributions we've heard tonight are amongst, if not the most powerful that we've heard all the way through this. Thank you, Gina. I mean, nobody could have spoken more passionately or persuasively than you just did. As you were saying, you know, the government likes to talk a lot about levelling up. Well, levelling up starts with lifting up the excluded, doesn't it? Because you can't level up a country on shattered foundations like these when you've got so many people who are going to be the recovery when it comes. If they're not ready, then we won't be levelling up anything. And, you know, it's heartbreaking for us all to listen. You're right. There shouldn't be a meeting like this. None of you should be going through what you're going through, but you are, and we'll be with you as long as you are to try and make sure that something is done to support you. I'm going to hand over to the Mayor of the Sheffield City region. I think we all feel a personal loyalty to people who've spoken. I'm sure Dan feels that for Eleanor, I do for Gaynor certainly, and I'm sure Steve does for Alison. Matthew, you know, I think have kind of, in many ways, kind of, we're all kind of absolutely feeling for you in the situation that you're in right now, and you know, we're all with you. But I want to say to all four of you, you couldn't have spoken better tonight, and you've spoken for hundreds of thousands of other people who are in your position. So just a massive thank you to you all. But Dan, if I could hand over to you, and then I'll come back to Steve.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's a pleasure to stand with you and Steve, and it's been absolutely heartbreaking to hear the testimony of Eleanor, Matthew, Gaynor and Alison. It is heartbreaking. And Gina spoke with such passion and spoke for all of us when she called this out as being completely unacceptable, which it is. And I was listening to what people had to say tonight and reflecting on the fact that I think in years to come, we will look back at this most traumatic period in our history. And I think then it will be recognised that a terrible unfairness and injustice has been inflicted on some 3 million people right around the country who've been excluded from support. Now, whilst I think it would have been forgivable if that quickly had been put right, it is now, I'm afraid, unforgivable that it still hasn't been. We estimate that around 68,000 people have been excluded from support in South Yorkshire alone. So this is a massive issue for us in our part of the world. And of course, as we've heard tonight, those affected have now had to endure a year of the pandemic without the help that they both need and deserve. They've been through local and national lockdowns, and it just seems to me it's plain wrong that after so long and after such persistent efforts from wonderful campaigners, including from Excluded UK, the government just has not done more to identify and help these people who are desperate. I accept it might not be easy. It might need safeguards, but we are still leaving people behind amid this crisis. And that should be a problem for all of us. And the truth of the matter is, it is not less of a problem because we're now starting to see the way out of lockdown. We still need to make sure that we're filling in the gaps in support, not just to help people survive the long path out of restrictions, but the many months of economic disruption that will inevitably follow, even after the pandemic has receded. So I hope that the Chancellor finally listens to the voices we've heard speak so powerfully tonight. He needs, in next week's budget, to fill the gaps which have left so many people in desperation throughout this crisis. But I also hope he does that as part of a wider effort to do better on economic support measures around COVID more generally. We need more funding to support our businesses. We need more generous and more widely available payments for people who have to self-isolate. And we need to have a comprehensive economic plan for recovery that tackles the great challenges that our country faces and will face in the years to come, and which recognises that areas which were already relatively deprived before COVID are likely to take much longer to recover from its economic fallout. So let's keep going. Let's see what next week's budget brings. Let's keep campaigning. Let's make sure our voices are heard. But Rishi Sunak should understand that 3 million people or more will be watching his budget next week and watching very closely. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, Andy.
It's great to have you with us, Dan, and thanks for speaking so powerfully yourself this evening and speaking for everybody on the call. Steve, I want to come to you now. I mean, the stories we've heard tonight are, as I say, amongst the most powerful, aren't they? We've heard about Eleanor's life and her pregnancy being affected. Matthew, 18, taking on a life-changing loan, trying to help the people he employs. Gaynor losing her house, and obviously Alison's story moved us all. So it's really hard, isn't it, for us to be able to, find words to kind of respond, really, given the enormity of what you've all said. But I'll turn to my good friend Steve, who always finds a good turn of phrase to be able to see if we can lift you all at the end. But over to you, mate. It's a campaign that you and I will never give up, will we? We don't give up on campaigns, and we won't give up on the excluded.
No, and it's right that we shouldn't, because this is something obviously that's very close to our hearts in regard to what's happened in our own areas. But actually, we all need to pull together, because it's a great injustice that's being perpetrated on a national scale. And the reason that I got into politics, and I know you're the same, and Dan will be the same, and lots of other people, but the reason that we first get into politics is because we see something that's an injustice and we want to create a fairer society. And, social justice is in my DNA. And it was interesting, that Gina was talking before about. This needs a response. It needs to be socially just on behalf of a whole country. And you can't leave anybody behind, but you certainly can't leave big chunks of people behind who, again, as Gina referred to, will be expecting to be there for us in the years ahead to rebuild after recovery and to get into growth for the economy that we want to create. And that means that people will have to be flexible. And I guess what every single business has to be flexible. I've been self-employed myself. I've had a small business. It's not easy. You literally are scrabbling around for every single penny. And to literally have the rug pulled from under you, I think, is one of the biggest national disgraces, actually, in recent years. So, we'll all do what we can do, but the pressure still needs to be brought to bear on the Chancellor. It's the Chancellor that can write the cheque, that can put this injustice right. It's the Chancellor that needs to be convinced of the argument. It's the Chancellor that keeps on coming up with the same tired excuses. We need to make him understand that, just as Andy said, we won't go away. Excluded aren't going to go away. And those 3 million voices and those 3 million votes that Gina again referred to will be important to whoever it is that is seeking to get support at a national or local level. And I think you'd ignore 3 million angry people at your peril. So the appeal is, Chancellor, this is the last chance saloon. Do the right thing. Support the people you have so far failed to support. Help out the excluded and forgotten and other groups, but help out those people so that when we do get to recovery, we can genuinely hit the ground running.
Thanks so much, Steve. And it was the Chancellor who said he would leave nobody behind, wasn't it? And it won't be long before the 1-year anniversary of those words will be coming up. And I think he's got a chance on Wednesday to make sure that anniversary is never marked when he goes a full year of not honouring that commitment. So Wednesday's the day, isn't it? It's about not handouts, Chancellor, it's about fairness for fellow taxpayers. And we keep coming back to that. It's the people who are going to lead your recovery. And we want you to now do what is right, as you just said, Steve, and provide the support. Kevin, was there a question did Joshi want to ask one of our speakers a question before we finish tonight?
He did, yes. It's a question from Joshi Herman to Eleanor, please, if Eleanor's still on. I think she is. Joshi.
Hey, Eleanor. Thank you very much for everything you said. That was really moving. I had a quick question, what does the year ahead look for you like now and your business? And are you still going to be operating in 6 months' time? And maybe it's impossible to say, but maybe you could give us a sense of what the future looks like for you, for what you're doing.
Thanks for your question. Yeah, that's really interesting. So just kind of like the same pattern as this previous year, I cannot see past month by month. So I have no idea whether, because people are doing classes online, there's only so much of that you can do. People need human interaction. So every month it's kind of iffy as to how many people would want to carry on, and rightly so. Also, when things open up, I think it gets, as well as being really exciting and a really big kind of light at the end of the tunnel, it's quite scary and daunting for business owners to suddenly have to jump through so many different hoops and dodge different kind of rules and regulations. Kind of, I suppose, things that businesses would usually take years to implement have to sort of be done immediately, really, really fast. And we get the news at the same time as all of our clients as well. So we're kind of rushed to make a decision. So I suppose the basic answer is, I don't know at all. I hope that helps.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Thanks, Joshy. Andy?
So I think that brings us towards the close. I don't know if anybody else has a burning point that they wanted to make. I think they've all been made, to be honest. Couldn't be more powerful. You couldn't have spoken better. We couldn't feel for you more than we do, because you just have made the case tonight, and we just hope. It's one thing about listening, it's another thing about truly hearing, isn't it? And then acting. And that's where we've reached now. We've reached that point. So I just want to say thank you to John, to Gina, and to Martin. That is heavyweight support that you've all had tonight, and I hope that gives you a lift, everybody. You know, they've given you honest advice. They've spoken from their own experience, but they are really rooting for you. They are really in there speaking to the Chancellor and others for you. John particularly, and Gina speaking so passionately. So thank you to them for joining us tonight. Thank you to my fellow mayors, to the Mayor of the Sheffield City Region, Dan, Liverpool City Region, Steve. Continue to support you all the way, and all of us will continue to provide these platforms for you. And thanks to Kevin and Sonali and the team at Excluded for bringing this together. But I'm just going to finish tonight by thanking, again, on behalf of everybody who's tuned in tonight, thanking Eleanor, thanking Matthew, thanking Gaynor, thanking Allison. You know, there are hundreds of thousands of people behind each and every one of you who were cheering you on as you were speaking, because you were speaking for them. And if nothing else tonight, let that give you some sense of worth, that you've done that tonight, that you've been that voice for people. You couldn't have communicated your stories more personally or more powerfully. You were brave in doing so, you know, because it's obvious what this is doing to you. As John said, it was there in your voices. We could see it in your faces, and it's not easy to come on a platform like this and do what you've done and open up in the way that you have. But you're doing it for not just yourself, you're doing it for, as I said, hundreds of thousands of others too. So it's been a really powerful event tonight, everybody. Thanks to all of those, finally, who've tuned in via the various streams that are taking this feed tonight. You know, we can't see you, but we know you're there, and we know this community is strong as much as it can be in these difficult times. We'll continue to keep fighting. And all eyes on the Chancellor. You've got a chance to fix this, Chancellor. We want you to fix this. We want this. We don't do this for party politics. We're doing it to get the result for the country, and so that we can all move forward together coming out of this pandemic. So please, as Steve said, please do the right thing. Justice and fairness for our fellow citizens, for our fellow taxpayers. This is what Britain is meant to be about, isn't it? A country that believes in fair play and does the right thing and carries all people with us. And that's what you've heard tonight, loud and clear. And we await to see what you've got to say next week. So thank you, everybody, for being part of this tonight. And whatever happens, the campaign to support you will go on. Thank you.